Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wassalam ala rasulillah. We left off with outlining the thematic clarification, interpretation of Surah Al-Baqarah by Muhammad Abdullah Daraz. And he outlined 6 points with regard to how we should approach Surah Al-Baqarah. The first being that Surah Al-Baqarah has an introductory theme that is important to understand, and that is that the Quran is a book that can be counted on, depended on, in which one should be certain about, and it's a book of guidance. Secondly, that the address of the Quran, that the audience of the Quran is all of humanity, and in this case, that would mean that the da'wah to Islam is for all of humanity and is not just restricted to one people. Secondly, this surah in specific, Surah Al-Baqarah, takes up a special appeal to the people of the book, those who received revelations prior to the revelation of the Quran. And it calls the people of the book, or those who are following those revelations that came before, to abandon falsehood, which was introduced into their religions, and to embrace the purity of faith, which is transmitted in the Quran, or the true faith, with regard to who Allah is and the prophets. The third purpose or aim of Surah Al-Baqarah is to clarify for the believers details of practice, specifically rules and guidelines with regard to that which is commanded and that which is prohibited. And the fourth purpose speaks about the nature of the human being that is open to guidance, and outlines that which is prohibited or that which is problematic as far as human behavior, and which leads one to spiritual harm. And then lastly, the surah closes out with speaking about those who have responded to the call of revelation, and encourages them and motivates them by speaking about what is the reward to come. So now we go into some more detail. The introduction portion of Surah Al-Baqarah consists of about 20 ayat in the teachings of Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah Daraz. Firstly, the surah begins with addressing its listeners by reciting what we call the huruf of the Arabic language, and in specific, these huruf, or these letters, serve as a way to call the attention to the listener, call the attention of the listener, so that the listener is aware and is conscious of what's being said. And this was an approach that was never utilized among the Arabs. They were people of poetry, people of literature, people of prose. But this approach was unique. And so firstly, the Quran is drawing attention. And then secondly, the description of what is going to be recited is being told to the listener. And that is that this is a book in which there's no doubt, and it is a book of guidance. It's a book of guidance. And there's mention that's made of the Quran as being true. And one of the points that Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah Daraz brings up here is that humanity has a need for truth, a need for clear guidance, a need to remove doubts from the minds and the hearts of the people, for the thinking of the people to be clear, so that decisions can be made that are beneficial, and so that truth can be embraced and it can be lived by. As we mentioned in the first installation, Surah Al-Fatiha talks to us about wanting guidance. We're asking Allah for guidance. Surah Al-Baqarah follows up in the Mus'haf, because Surah Al-Baqarah in the Mus'haf, it comes after Surah Al-Fatiha, and it responds to teach people exactly what is guidance. And the Quran is described as being guidance. And then that description of the Quran as being guidance is followed up with teachings with regard to who Allah is, and how it is that we gain the pleasure of Allah, and how it is that those that came before us have strayed away after receiving prophetic guidance, so that we're given examples so that we come to understand what it is that we should avoid in terms of human behavior, or what it is that leads us astray. That's something that's extremely important. One of the things I want to pause on is that in Surah Al-Baqarah, there's mention that is made of the pillars of Islam. Mention that's made of the pillars of Islam. And that mention that's made of the pillars of Islam includes the idea of worship in general, and then the worship is specifically identified as the pillars of Islam. The pillars of Islam. Although worship is wider than the pillars of Islam, but the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah is talking about the need for worship in general as a way to gain taqwa, especially in the earlier portion of Surah Al-Baqarah. And then mention is made with regard to Iman. Mention is made also with regard to what we call Islam. And this is where specific mention is made of the types of worship. Now, why is that important? The types of worship that we know to make up the pillars or the cornerstones of Islam. These cornerstones serve as a way to train us, as a way to inculcate, develop in us the qualities of Iman, right? And so the Quran is not just talking to us on a theoretical note, but is giving us practical instruction as to how it is that we gain the quality of taqwa. And the pathways to taqwa have everything to do with what? Have everything to do with establishing the pillars, which herein we begin to see why it is that the Quran, why was it revealed over a period of time gradually? Because when we talk about the practical aspects, when we talk about the practical implementation of the teachings, not just having teachings that don't have any relationship to action or life, but having teachings and then implementing those teachings. When we talk about the implementation process, we really realize that there is a call for a transformation of the self. And so that struggle with the self, is a struggle which demands some practical way of implementing the deen. And when we look at the fast of Ramadan as an example, the fast of Ramadan is a practical implementation of the teachings of the deen that has deep impact on us, especially when it's done soundly and correctly. And so from here, we get an understanding of how it is that the book of Allah Ta'ala is a book of guidance. And with this, we end, people. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.